All right, guys, it's time to talk about this pear tree. This is an extremely important part of the novel that will stretch out throughout the whole novel. This image is going to be repeated, so you want to pay close attention to it. For this is in chapter two, and for this version of it, it is on page 10, but it is in chapter two. So I think I'm just gonna read through it and then talk about it after I read it. It was a spring afternoon in West Florida. Janie had spent most of the day under a blossoming pear tree in the backyard. She had been spending every minute that she could steal from her chores under that tree for the last 3 days. That was to say, ever since the first tiny bloom had opened. It had called her to come and gaze on a mystery, from barren brown stems to glistening leaf buds, from the leaf buds to snowy virginity of bloom. It stirred her tremendously. How? Why? It was like a flute song forgotten in another existence and remembered again. What? How? Why? This singing she heard that had nothing to do with her ears. The rose of the world was breathing out smell. It followed her through all her waking moments and caressed her in her sleep. It connected itself with other vaguely felt matters that had struck her outside observation and buried themselves in her flesh. Now they emerged and quested about her consciousness. She was stretched on her back beneath the pear tree, soaking in the alto chant of the visiting bees, the gold of the sun, and the panting breath of the breeze, when the inaudible voice of it all came to her. She saw a dust bearing bee sink into the sanctum of a bloom, the thousand sister calyxes arc to meet the love embrace, and the ecstatic shiver of the tree from root to tiniest branch, creaming in every blossom and frothing with delight. So this was a marriage. She had been summoned to behold a revelation. Then Janie felt a pain remorseless sweet that left her limp and languid. And we know right after this, she gets up, she sees Johnny Taylor, some random dude, her age, walking around, and like she goes and kisses him across the gatepost. So, what is this? First of all, if you did the multiple choice yesterday, Friday, yes, you noticed there was a question that talked about like the sexual imagery in here, and I wonder how many of you picked up on that. I'm always interested in seeing um, which students like notice that right away and which students are like, what? Sexual? It's a tree, you know? So I don't know how you guys approach this, but let's talk about what this is. So I don't want to be too awkward, but this is extremely important in this novel. So I think the question I normally ask my students about this is, when did you have your first crush? Like, when did you first know you liked someone romantically? When did you first, feel that stirring? Some of you maybe haven't yet, and some of you maybe never will. Like some people don't feel that at all, and that's okay. But some of you probably already have and noticed a time when you were attracted to someone else. But I kind of wonder, like, I'll just talk about me, and my experience might be very different from others. I think the first time I felt that was like in kindergarten, and that seems really young. I mean, and obviously I didn't know everything about it, but I think maybe the reason for that is because I watched so many Disney movies, like growing up, I was watching The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and all this stuff. And I had all these ideas about what romance was supposed to be. And I loved those movies. And so, very early in life, I was thinking about what romance was supposed to be like. And that often happens. I think we get these influences. Have you ever been somewhere and there was like a little boy toddler and a little girl toddler, and then people are like, oh, look, there's your girlfriend, or look, there's your boyfriend? That's really creepy, first of all. So please don't do that. But second of all, like that happens a lot. And from a very young age, we instill these like ideas into children about what love is supposed to be like and also how they're supposed to interact, particularly with members of the opposite sex. Like we really push that heteronormative stereotype by any time a little boy and a little girl are together being like, oh, there's your girlfriend. Like you can't have an interaction without it being romantic, which is creepy. Anyway, so maybe avoid that with your kids. Like not everyone they play with has to be their boyfriend or girlfriend. But anyway, so we do this, and So kids grow up, I know I did, like having this idea that anytime you see, for me, anytime I saw a boy, I was immediately like hit with that idea that it was supposed to be romantic from the adults in my life, from the movies I watched. Janie is in a very different situation. Janie is raised by her nanny and kind of by herself. She wasn't even in school at this point. So she doesn't have TV or anything to watch. I don't even think she has books to read. So she's just kind of out here living her life. So how does she get these ideas in her head about romance? Well, that's an interesting thing. I mean, we assume, I don't biologically, I don't know. I don't want to make claims that I don't know anything about, but obviously all species reproduce in some way, and mammals reproduce sexually, and we're mammals, and like we figure it out without influences, and other animals figure it out without influences. So this is something that happens even if you don't have those influences. But in humans, we often have these outside influences of our culture to try to establish what this means for us. For Janie, she doesn't have that. So this is a really unique experience. Janie gets to get her ideas about love from nature, from herself. She is not influenced by these outside perceptions. So if you later we see Nanny wanting to get her married right away because Nanny definitely has lots of influences about what she thinks about love. We'll talk about this later, but Nanny, obviously has terrible experiences. She grew up as a slave, and she was raped by her owner. She saw her daughter raped by her school teacher. She thinks love is not a thing, and all it does is get Black women in trouble. All it does is force them into bad positions and destroy their lives. And so, because that's her experience, it's understandable why she thinks that. Um, so she just wants to get Janie married, but Janie has this experience of understanding love from this pear tree. So where am I getting that? And I know there's all these memes and whatever about, I saw a TikTok the other day about how English teachers just make stuff up. I get it, but this really is about this. So let's dissect a little bit and talk about what it's saying here. So Janie spends her day under this pear tree. And she keeps going there. And first of all, she goes there for 3 days. That's significant. The number three is always significant. Like she has spent 3 days under this tree. It reminds me, I don't think this is necessarily a connection here, but it reminds me of the story of like Buddha going to this tree and, like he becomes enlightened under the tree. But I don't know how long he's been under a tree, but like it's almost this spiritual practice of going to this tree every day. And it's important that it's spring. Spring is definitely like associated with awakenings and with sexual awakening. Like there's that musical that's called Spring Awakening, which is about that, but also blooming, and that's when nature is reproducing. So this tiny bloomed open, and it had called her to gaze on a mystery. This is interesting, actually. This reminds me of a Bible verse. I know it's Paul. I don't know which book it's in, but he talks about marriage as a mystery. You know what? I'm going to pause and pull it up. Okay, I found it. It's Ephesians, um, chapter 5, and I'm looking specifically at verse 31. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother to be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. So this is even Paul here in Ephesians, calling marriage a mystery, this joining of like becoming one flesh, this idea of a mystery. So again, this connection here, that's connection I'm making. I'm not saying Zora Neale Hurston was making it, but it is this mystery, like this idea of romance and coming together and becoming one is a mystery. And this pear tree is calling on her to watch it and to see this mystery. So from barren brown stems. That word barren there obviously has the connotation of like um, wombs and reproducing. Barren brown stems to glistening leaf buds, from the leaf buds to snowy virginity of bloom. Why are we talking about a tree having virginity? I mean, we're throwing in this language here because we are trying to show this experience as an experience where she has this awakening and understands this from this tree. So stirred her tremendously. How? Why? And it's talking about this as like as something that we don't all, but that as many humans experience, that is this natural concept, this natural thing that we all kind of have awakened in us individually. And so that's why it's talking about like a forgotten in another existence and remembered again, like something that just stirs in humans and we connect to naturally. Um, so let's see. It connected itself with other vaguely felt matters that had struck her outside observation and buried themselves in her flesh. So it's been happening for a long time, but she's like just coming to understand it. So then I've highlighted here for another class all the language in here that, is connected to sexual imagery while she's under this pear tree. So she watches the bees and the blooms, and the inaudible voice of it all came to her. She gains this understanding. So this was a marriage. And so what the important thing about this is for her idea of love comes from sitting beneath a pear tree, and it has nothing to do with the a lot of the things that we often associate with marriage, like like houses, like building a life together or a marriage ceremony or anything. It's just connected to this idea of nature, this kind of communing, this natural experience where these beings are helping each other. And so she has this, I would call it a perfect idea of love, this idealized idea of love that comes from nature itself. It doesn't come from her friends or her family. It is completely unconnected to society and is just within her and within nature. So as we go on throughout the novel, we're going to see this idea of like pollination and like trees and all this kind of stuff connected to her idea of love and also her idea of happiness and herself. So anytime you see nature imagery, and it's sometimes going to be very subtle, like pollen. Let's just take a look. With this, you can do it. I'm going to hit Command F, and it brings up this box where I can find. So I'm going to do, let's do bloom. See where we can find the word bloom. Okay, let's see. To be any tree in bloom. This is later on here where she's waiting on Johnny Taylor. She waited a bloom time. Okay, here we go. This is talking about Joe. Janie pulled back a long time because he did not represent sunup and pollen and blooming trees. So pollen and blooming trees is like her idea of love. She knows he does not represent sunup and pollen and blooming trees, but he spoke for a far horizon. Another image in this book where um, this like chance, this opportunity to see things. He's not her perfect love, but he is something. What about golden? So often the pollen is called golden dust. It's like golden. Okay, this is uh, too early. Okay, the golden dust of pollen have beglamored his rags in her eyes. This is when she sees Johnny Taylor. Golden moments. Okay, not as much. But when we see this idea of pollen and bloom, all of that stuff, that's connected to this image here. So you can also do that with your copy of this, go through and find examples of some of these word choices and how they're going to be connected to Janie's idea of herself and Janie's idea of love. So the pear tree in particular is the kind of main focus of this idea. And then we see it throughout the text. So make sure you pay attention to that nature imagery.